Just a nurse. That's what Dr. Pierce called her when he thought the elevator doors were closing. Just a nurse with an online degree and steady hands that had no business touching real patients. He didn't know those hands had sutured a femoral artery with a needle and 550 paracord in a Bagram bunker while rounds snapped overhead like angry wasps. He had no idea the quiet woman adjusting the flow rate in room for 12 had performed a field thoracotomy using a Ka-bar knife and a prayer, cracking ribs open with the kind of precision that only comes from watching someone bleed out and deciding they won't. The laughter stopped when she finally looked him in the eye. But that wasn't the worst part. That wasn't the part that would end everything. Danielle Ross arrived at Cedar Creek Medical at 5:02 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, her scrubs already pressed, her badge already clipped, her military bearing already softened into the gentle efficiency expected of a pediatric nurse. The hallway smelled like antiseptic and the faint ghost of somebody's breakfast from the break room, coffee and regret. Her boots made no sound on the tile. She had trained them not to. After 13 years, her feet obeyed commands her mouth never spoke aloud. The pediatric wing was quiet in that specific way hospitals are quiet before shift change, before the machines start their full chorus of beeping and humming and soft mechanical sighs. Emergency room lights glowed fluorescent bright overhead, casting everything in a shallow, shadowless white. She passed the nursing station where 3 night shift nurses were finishing their charts, their eyes tired in a way that didn't have anything to do with sleep. They looked up as she passed. One of them looked away first. Danielle didn't let herself notice. Didn't let herself care. She pushed her locker open, a small compartment with a tiny mirror, a change of shoes, and a framed photograph her hands didn't want to look at but her mind couldn't stop seeing. The photo was 6 years old. It showed 14 Marines in full tactical gear, standing in front of a Humvee with Dark Horse painted on the side in faded letters. They were 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, Charlie Company, and 3 of their faces had been carefully, methodically crossed out in black marker. Danielle had done that crossing out herself, in her apartment at 3 a.m., unable to stop until the faces were completely gone. She closed the locker door. A tremor ran through her left hand, just a flutter, barely visible, the kind of thing nobody would notice unless they were trained to notice it. She pressed her palm flat against the cold metal of the locker and waited for the tremor to pass. It always passed. Her left hand had learned not to shake in public, the same way her voice had learned not to break, the same way her face had learned not to show what was happening behind her ribs. The uniform jacket hanging on the hook inside had a secret that nobody at Cedar Creek knew. The faded 2nd Marine Division patch was sewn into the inside lining, hidden against the cloth, pressed close to her skin where it felt like a pulse, like proof that she had been someone else. Someone authorized to give orders. Someone with a call sign that had meant something to people who didn't come home. She left the jacket there. The patient charts were already loaded in the system when she logged in at her station. She scrolled through the admissions from the night shift, noting the routine crises, a 7-year-old with acute pneumonia, a 5-year-old post-op from appendectomy, a 3-year-old with severe dehydration from gastroenteritis. All of it was survivable. All of it was the kind of medicine where people got better if you paid attention and didn't make stupid mistakes. And then she saw it. Room for 12. New admission at 11:43 p.m. Commander Marcus Vega, USMC. Guardian, not patient. 1 child dependent. 7 years old. Male. Name redacted in the system except for file reference code 771 Theta secure. Selective mutism. Post-traumatic stress presentation. Previous facility, Walter Reed Medical Center. Previous facility, Bethesda Naval Medical Center. Previous facility, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. 3 hospitals. 3 specialists. 3 failures. The next line made her jaw clench so hard her back molars ached. Exposure incident, Bagram Airfield, 2019. Witnessed IED strike resulting in fatality of nanny and household staff member. Child has produced no verbal output for 8 months and 3 weeks. 8 months and 3 weeks. 264 days of silence. Danielle's hands moved to the keyboard on their own, pulling up the full chart. She read the notes from pediatric psychiatry at Bethesda. The psychologist had recommended continued pharmaceutical intervention and the potential consideration of long-term residential therapeutic placement. The notes from Landstuhl were shorter, less optimistic. The word refractory appeared twice, underlined. She had seen this kind of silence before. She had seen children who stopped speaking because the only sounds they remembered were the sounds of people screaming. She had held children whose hands shook exactly like her left hand shook, from deep inside the nervous system, from the part of the brain that had learned the world wasn't safe. She had watched other medical professionals treat that kind of trauma like it was a puzzle to solve with the right medication combination, when what it needed was someone who understood that sometimes you don't heal from something, sometimes you just learn to carry it. The chart noted the boy had been transferred to Cedar Creek because of a specialized trauma program recommendation, but the current pediatric director had approved standard medical protocols pending psychiatric evaluation. Standard. Danielle closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds. When she opened them again, she was in motion. She pulled up the treatment room, made a note in the digital file, not anything that would show up on the main chart, just a clinical observation in the nursing notes. Child presentation consistent with complex PTSD in pediatric population. Recommend trauma-informed assessment battery. Environmental modifications to reduce stimulus sensitivity. Recommend continued presence of guardian during interventions. Recommend minimal pharmaceutical intervention pending behavioral baseline. She clicked save and the note disappeared into the system like it had always been there. Like it mattered. At 6:36 a.m., Dr. Thomas Pierce arrived for rounds. He was the kind of man who wore his white coat the way other men wore armor, stiff, imposing, expensive. His shoes were Italian leather, the kind that cost what 3 nurses made in a month. His hair was carefully grayed at the temples in a way that looked accidentally distinguished. He had trained at Johns Hopkins and referred to it constantly, the way other people referred to their children's Ivy League acceptance letters. Danielle was checking the 4 on the pneumonia patient when he swept past, his entourage already forming around him, the resident, the medical student, the eager intern who hadn't yet learned that asking questions just gave attendings reasons to belittle you for hours. Ross, Dr. Pierce said. Not a greeting. Not quite an acknowledgement. The kind of address that confirmed you existed but didn't really matter. Room for 12. The new admission. I need full vitals and a baseline behavioral observation. Nothing fancy. We're going to do this by the book. Yes, doctor, Danielle said. She had already moved to the side of the hallway, making space for his entourage. She had already made herself smaller. He didn't wait for her to respond. He was already moving toward room for 12, the resident fumbling to catch up, the medical student trailing behind with her tablet trying to load the patient chart. Danielle watched them go, watched the way Pierce's shoulders moved, confident and untouchable, and then she looked down at her hands. They were steady. They were always steady. She was already moving toward the room when something made her stop. A sound. The heart monitor in room for 12 was beeping at a normal rate, steady and sure. The ventilator in the adjacent room hummed its mechanical rhythm, pushing air in and out, the sound of breathing for someone whose lungs had forgotten how. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with the specific frequency that made your teeth ache if you thought about it too much. She thought about it. She couldn't help it. When she entered room for 12, Commander Vega was standing by the window in dress blues, not his usual uniform, something dress formal, something that meant he had come straight from somewhere official. His insignia caught the morning light, a full commander rank, 23 years of service if she was reading the ribbons right. His face was the color of someone who hadn't slept in approximately 100 hours. The boy was in the hospital bed, small enough to look lost in the standard pediatric setup, his shoulders hunched under a thin hospital blanket. He had his father's sharp cheekbones and his father's dark eyes, but where the commander's eyes held the flat, focused intensity of someone in the military, the boy's eyes held the wild, hunted look of a small animal that had learned the world contained pain. He didn't look at her when she came in. He didn't look at his father either. He just looked at the wall, at something beyond the wall, at something nobody else could see. Full assessment, Dr. Pierce said. He was already moving on, already sweeping back out of the room like he had never really been there. Get me baseline vitals, neuro check, behavioral notes. I'll prescribe something for the anxiety after breakfast. We've got him for 72 hours before the next evaluation window. Danielle nodded. She didn't speak. She was already counting the moments until Pierce left the room, already planning what she would actually do versus what she would document. When the door closed behind them, she stepped closer to the bed and pulled up a chair so she was at eye level with the boy. Not above him. Never above them. I'm Danielle, she said. Her voice was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't demand anything. I'm going to check your heart rate and your blood pressure and make sure the 4 is running right. You don't have to talk. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. I'm just checking the machines. The machines are loud, but they're not scary. They're just doing their job. The boy didn't move. Didn't acknowledge. But something shifted in his shoulders, just a millimeter, just a fraction of relaxation that might have been nothing at all. Danielle began her assessment with the same precision she had learned in a bunker in Bagram, where precision meant the difference between a patient who lived and a patient who bled out on the floor while you tried to convince his family that you did everything you could. The heart monitor showed regular sinus rhythm, 89 beats per minute, appropriate for a 7-year-old in a hospital setting. Blood pressure 94/58, slightly low but not concerning for pediatric presentation. O2 sat 98% on room air. Respiration steady and unlabored. All the numbers said the boy was physically fine. The numbers never said anything about the spaces where a person's ability to speak should have been, the silence where language used to live. She made her notes in the chart. Clinical observations. Baseline assessment. Pending psychiatric evaluation. And then, in the nursing observation section, she added something that Pierce would probably never read: patient demonstrates protective positioning and hypervigilance consistent with complex trauma presentation. Recommend gentle environmental modification and consistent caregiver presence. Medical intervention should be secondary to psychological safety establishment. She saved the note. The system accepted it into the patient record like it had been there all along. When she turned back to the bed, the boy was finally looking at her. Just barely. Just out of the corner of his eye. And Danielle, who had learned her entire life not to show the things that happened inside her chest, kept her face absolutely steady and gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod. What she didn't know was that Commander Vega had already made phone calls that morning. What she didn't know was that the Marines in her old unit, the ones whose names hadn't been crossed out, the ones still breathing, had received encrypted messages asking about a nurse in Savannah who moved like someone trained for combat. What she didn't know was that her placement at Cedar Creek wasn't random, that a call had come from someone very high up in the Navy asking that she be put exactly where Commander Vega's son would be placed, watching, waiting, ready if something went wrong with a child who carried intelligence about an attack that still hadn't been fully investigated. She was here for the boy. But she had no idea what the boy actually was, or what his silence really meant, or that in exactly 4 days something would happen that would force her to choose between keeping her secret and keeping him alive. She adjusted the 4 drip rate to 50 milliliters per hour and promised herself it was just another shift. Just another patient. Just another child who needed someone who understood that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was stay quiet while everything inside you burned. The boy drew helicopters in the margins of his vitals chart. Danielle had noticed it 3 days ago, tiny pencil sketches of rotors and landing struts, always in the same corner, always the same aircraft. A UH-60 Black Hawk. She recognized the nose profile, the distinctive cabin shape. The child's father commanded Marines. The child knew helicopters the way other 7-year-olds knew cartoon characters. She was updating his medication log when Dr. Pierce's voice cut through the room like a blade through gauze. Nurse Ross. Not a question. A summons. Commander Vega stood in the doorway beside him, still in his dress blues, the creases sharp enough to draw blood. The boy's eyes went wide. Danielle felt the shift in air pressure, the way a room changes when authority walks in and refuses to leave. Pierce stepped closer, loud enough for the hallway to hear. "I've been reviewing your notes. Your very extensive notes about trauma-informed care protocols I didn't order, evidence-based interventions I didn't authorize, psychological assessment recommendations that seem to exceed your scope." He smiled at the commander like they were old friends sharing a private joke. "Did your online degree program cover actual neurology or just feelings and essential oils?" The words hung in the fluorescent-lit silence. 2 nurses passed in the corridor. They didn't slow down, but they heard. They always heard. Danielle met his eyes. Flat. Cold. The kind of stare that had silenced interrogation rooms in Helmand Province. Let him wait for her to flinch. Let him stand there trembling, expecting apology, expecting the small nurse to crumble under the weight of his credentials and his certainty and his absolute, unshakable conviction that he was the smartest person in every room he entered. She didn't give him 3 seconds of satisfaction. "I've closed more chest wounds than you've seen in textbooks, doctor." Her voice dropped an octave, smooth as a field-dressed rifle. "But here I follow your orders. Even the incompetent ones." She turned and walked past him, her shoulder inches from his chest, and continued her rounds. Behind her, she heard the commander's breathing shift, a sharp intake that sounded almost like respect. She heard Pierce's face flush purple before she heard his words come out strangled and small. By Tuesday, the break room had become a geography of avoidance. Danielle sat with her coffee and a worn copy of the American Journal of Critical Care Nursing, the spine cracked from 100 shifts. 3 nurses at the next table glanced at each other the way people do before abandoning a sinking ship. They grabbed their mugs, one still half full, steaming, a waste, and left through the door that swung closed with the metallic hiss of hydraulics. She turned a page. Didn't look up. The whispers had started Monday afternoon. Pierce had found the charge nurse in the supply closet, speaking in that concerned tone he reserved for serious conversations. Danielle's credentials. Questions about her previous employment. Concerns about patient safety. By Monday evening, 3 residents had heard versions of it. By Tuesday morning, the entire pediatric wing knew that someone, Pierce wouldn't say exactly who, but the implication was clear, had suggested she'd falsified her credentials, maybe falsified more than that. The coffee in her mug had gone cold an hour ago. The journal article blurred. She'd read the same paragraph for times. 2 more nurses entered. They saw her. Their steps slowed for a fraction of a second, that moment where the brain calculates whether social courtesy requires acknowledgement, and then they accelerated toward the far corner of the break room. One of them was Sarah Chen, who'd asked Danielle for advice about her daughter's anxiety 3 weeks ago and actually listened instead of just waiting for her turn to talk. Sarah didn't make eye contact now. The fluorescent lights buzzed above them, the sound like insects trapped in plastic. Danielle finished her cold coffee and left before the silence became something she'd have to carry with her all day. By Friday, the written warning was laminated and mounted on the unit board next to the shift schedule and a memo about mandatory CPR recertification. Disciplinary action. Employee, Danielle Ross, RN. Date of notice, Friday date. Reason, insubordination and unauthorized patient care decisions. Details, employee has exceeded scope of practice by recommending clinical interventions without physician approval, documented in patient charts, creating liability risk. Signature, Dr. Samuel Pierce, MD, Pediatrics. Each letter was crisp and official and absolute. The kind of document that ended careers. The kind of thing that followed you to your next job, if there was a next job. Junior staff walked past without meeting her eyes. The charge nurse avoided her in the hallway. A resident who'd borrowed her pen last week suddenly needed to check something in the computer instead of acknowledging her presence when she passed. Dr. Pierce watched her read it. He positioned himself near the nursing station, coffee mug in hand, that venomous smile in place like a scar tissue that never fully healed. He waited until she finished reading, until she turned away from the board, until their eyes met across the white linoleum. Some people forget their place, Ross. His voice was conversational, casual, the tone of a man explaining something obvious to someone slow. "I'm just helping you remember yours." She didn't respond. Didn't acknowledge him. Moved past him the way water moves around a stone, present, but not touching, not staying, not giving him the satisfaction of a reaction. But inside her jacket lining, sewn tight against the ribs over her heart, the faded 2nd Marine Division patch pressed like something alive. The boy watched from his doorway, his small frame silhouetted in the light from his room. He still clutched the stuffed Marine bulldog they'd brought him on admission day, tan and loyal and fierce, the battalion mascot immortalized in plush fabric. His eyes tracked Danielle as she moved through the ward. Still silent. Still watching. Still waiting for something. She wondered if he recognized the way she moved now, the way her spine had straightened an inch more each day. If children could sense when someone was shedding a skin they'd been wearing too long. The warning remained on the board through Friday night and into Saturday morning. By Monday, it would be filed in her permanent record. By next week, it would be in the references that potential employers called. By the time Cedar Creek Medical's legal team finished moving pieces around the chessboard, the damage would be absolute. What they didn't know, what Pierce didn't know, what the charge nurse and the residents and the nurses who abandoned their coffee didn't know, was that Danielle's previous employers didn't exist in any database they could access. That addresses listed on her application routed through Pentagon screening offices. That background verification request sent to those locations would arrive at desks with classified access, and the responses would come back stamped approved with clearance levels Pierce would never have the security credentials to read. She'd known this would happen. Not the specific details, not the timeline, but the general trajectory. You couldn't embed with a Marine unit commander's son without triggering administrative scrutiny when things went wrong. You couldn't be a combat medic in a pediatric hospital without eventually someone noticing that your hands moved with a precision that came from saving lives in bunkers, not textbooks. Naval intelligence had prepared her for the cover being blown. They hadn't prepared her for how it would feel to watch a child go silent again when the only person who understood what silence meant was about to disappear. Tuesday morning at Cedar Creek Medical came wrapped in that particular gray-white light that follows overnight rain. Danielle pushed the vitals cart down the pediatric corridor, her movements practiced, efficient, invisible. The fluorescent lights hummed their constant hymn overhead. She'd worked with that sound long enough that silence now felt like a weapon. Her badge clipped to her scrub pocket read Danielle Ross, RN in letters so small they required intention to read. The boys' room was on the east wing, third door past the nurse's station where she no longer sat during breaks. The cardboard box sat in her locker downstairs, packed and waiting. She had until Friday. The written warning on the unit board gave her that much. She knocked softly. No answer. She entered anyway. He was sitting up. Not lying down. Not curled on his side as he'd been yesterday and the day before. 7-year-old Commander Vega's son sat cross-legged on the hospital bed with a pencil in his small hand, drawing on the back of his discharge papers. His dark eyes, the same dark eyes as his father, that military-grade focus, tracked her movement into the room but didn't flinch. "Good morning," Danielle said. Her voice came out as it always did now, soft, deferential, a nurse asking permission to exist. "I need to check your vitals." The boy looked down at his drawing. A helicopter. Rendered in rough pencil strokes but unmistakably military. The rotors spun across the page in a way that suggested motion, urgency, arrival. He'd drawn 5 of them. Different angles. Different perspectives. As if he was trying to capture the exact moment something descended from the sky. Danielle reached for the blood pressure cuff. The boy's arm was small, still pale from 8 weeks indoors. She wrapped the Velcro around his bicep with practiced gentleness. The machine hummed to life, air rushing into the cuff, pressure climbing. 122/71. Elevated. She made a mental note. Pulse, she said quietly, reaching for his wrist. The boy's hand trembled slightly as she took it. Not fear. Something else. The trembling came from deep inside, from a place where muscles hold memories that the mind refuses to process. She'd seen it 1,000 times. In Bagram. In field hospitals. In the faces of Marines who'd watched their brothers disappear into the red dust and never come back. Pain is information. Pain is data. But sometimes pain is just the nervous system screaming. "Your heart rate's elevated," she said. "You okay?" He didn't respond. He never did. But his eyes tracked back to the helicopter drawings. She was checking his oxygen saturation, the small clip attached to his index finger registering 97%, when his body went rigid. Not gradually. All at once. His back arched off the bed like something was pulling him upward from inside his chest. His small jaw clamped shut so hard she could see the muscles cord beneath his skin. The pencil fell from his hand, clattered against the tile floor with the sound of something fragile breaking. His eyes rolled back, the white showing, and then his entire body began to convulse in hard, violent jerks that made the bed frame shake. Seizure. The clinical part of Danielle's brain catalogued it in milliseconds, generalized tonic-clonic, sudden onset, no warning signs. The other part, the part that had been forged in bunkers and under fire, was already moving. She hit the call button with one hand while reaching for the boy's airway with the other. Her fingers found the angle of his jaw, positioned his head to the side so that when his body convulsed, when the involuntary muscle contractions tried to force his tongue backward and block his airway, he could breathe. Could clear. Could survive the next 60 seconds. "Stay with me," she said. Not a question. A command. The voice she'd stopped using in public 3 weeks ago came back now, stripped of politeness, stripped of deference, stripped of everything except absolute authority. "I've got you." His body seized again, limbs flailing against the bed rails. She moved to the bedside, positioning herself to prevent him from striking his head on the metal frame. Her hands that had been steady through mortar fire, through bleeding, through the impossible math of triage when there weren't enough supplies and there were too many dying, moved with the same precision now. She protected his airway. She protected his head. She tracked his breathing. Oxygen saturation dropping, 94. 91, 88. The door burst open. A nurse, Jennifer, one of the rotating staff Pierce had assigned to the boy's care, stood frozen in the threshold, staring at Danielle and the convulsing child as if the scene required translation. "Get me a 14-gauge angiocath needle and a bag of normal saline," Danielle said without looking away from the boy. "Now. And alert Dr. Mitchell in pediatrics." Not Pierce. Mitchell. Jennifer didn't move. "Now," Danielle repeated. The word had weight. The kind of weight that comes from someone who's given orders in firefights, who's made split-second decisions when lives hung on precision. Jennifer's body responded before her mind caught up. She turned and ran. The seizure continued for another 30 seconds. 30 seconds that felt like 3 minutes. Muscle memory took over. Danielle's hand stayed positioned on the boy's jaw, keeping his airway patent, keeping him alive through the storm happening inside his small nervous system. She counted his respirations. Noted his color. Watched his oxygen saturation climb back up as his convulsions began to slow. 86, 89. 91. "That's it," she whispered. "That's it. You're okay. You're going to be okay." The seizure broke. His body went limp, muscles releasing from their locked state, and for a moment he lay gasping, his eyes unfocused and swimming, his chest heaving as his nervous system tried to remember how breathing worked. That's when Dr. Pierce appeared in the doorway. He stood there in his white coat, the one that had Dr. Marcus Pierce, MD, embroidered on the left pocket in letters expensive enough to announce status. His jaw was slack. His eyes fixed on Danielle's hands, on the way she'd positioned the boy's head, on the efficiency of her movements. His gaze tracked to the oxygen monitor, saturation back to 94% and climbing, and then to her face. Danielle was still in motion. She reached up and repositioned the pulse oximetry clip on the boy's finger, double-checking the reading. She was already reaching for the fall line when Jennifer returned with the angiocath needle, already assessing where the largest vein would be, the dorsal surface of his hand. She decided where she could tape it securely and avoid the boy's natural instinct to move away from the discomfort. 14-gauge angiocath, Jennifer said breathlessly, pressing the wrapped needle into her hand. Danielle's hands moved. The alcohol swab came out. The skin went cool, disinfected. Her fingers found the vein with the kind of certainty that comes from doing something 5,000 times. Once. The needle slid in. The vein flashed. The catheter threaded home. Taped. Secure. She was already drawing blood from the line before he'd fully registered the pain. Type and cross, she said to Jennifer. CBC, CMP, anticonvulsant levels if we have baseline serum. She paused, glanced at the chart. Look back at Jennifer. We don't have baseline. Send it to labs anyway. And I need those vitals again. BP, heart rate, temperature, respiratory rate, oxygen saturation. Full neuro check. Glasgow Coma Scale. Jennifer's fingers flew across the keyboard. Danielle's attention was already shifting to the monitoring equipment, to the heart rate climbing from 142 back toward 120, to the respiratory rate slowing as the boy's nervous system recovered from the electrical storm. Dr. Mitchell appeared in the doorway behind Pierce, slightly out of breath, his presence sharp and alert in a way that Pierce's wasn't. The attending physician's eyes moved from the convulsing boy to Danielle to the fall line to the monitors displaying perfectly tracked vitals, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition. Not of her identity. Of her competence. What happened? Mitchell asked. Generalized tonic-clonic seizure, Danielle said. Onset sudden, no preceding aura that the patient was able to communicate. Lasted approximately 60 seconds. Airway protected throughout. O2 saturation minimum 84 at seizure peak, recovered to 94 as convulsions resolved. For access established. Labs drawn. Patient currently postictal and stable. Mitchell stepped forward. He looked at the monitors. He looked at the boy. He looked at Danielle's hands, still steady, still ready, still monitoring the foresight for any sign of infiltration. Who established access? He asked. I did, Danielle said. Pierce's face had gone pale. Not the pale of someone concerned about a patient. The pale of someone watching something he didn't understand, something that didn't fit into the narrative he'd constructed. His eyes moved from Danielle to Jennifer to the perfectly placed fall line, and his jaw worked silently, trying to form words that wouldn't come. The boy's breathing had stabilized. His eyes were beginning to focus. Danielle reached over and gently squeezed his small shoulder just above his collarbone where the tension was still coiled tight. You're safe, she said quietly. The seizure is over. You're in the hospital. You're going to be okay. The boy's gaze found her face. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered behind those dark eyes. Recognition. Trust. The knowledge that the person standing over him had seen worse and was still standing. That whatever was happening inside his body, inside his mind, there was someone in the room who understood what it felt like to survive things that weren't supposed to survive. The heart monitor beeped its steady rhythm. The oxygen meter glowed green. Mitchell turned to Pierce. I'm taking primary care of this patient effective immediately. I'll need his full chart and any notes you've made on treatment decisions. Pierce opened his mouth. Closed it. His hands clenched at his sides. The protocols for pediatric seizure management are, or Pierce started. I know the protocols, Mitchell interrupted quietly. I also know competence when I see it. He looked at Danielle. You. With me. We need to discuss his medication regimen and seizure risk factors. Danielle glanced at the boy. His eyes were tracking her, his hand still trembling slightly from the post-seizure neurological storm. Jennifer will stay with him, Mitchell said, reading the hesitation. Won't you, Jennifer? Yes, Jennifer said immediately. Yes, of course. Danielle stood. The moment she did, the boy's hand reached out, caught the edge of her scrub pocket. Not hard. Just a grip. Just a child trying to hold on to the one person in the room who'd kept him alive when his own nervous system tried to kill him. She looked down at his small fingers. At the 4-line taped securely to his hand. At the monitors showing his heart rate, his oxygen, his survival. Then she gently squeezed his hand once, released it, and turned toward Mitchell. But that wasn't the worst part. Behind her, in the doorway, Dr. Pierce was already pulling out his phone. His face had shifted from confusion to something colder. Something calculating. His fingers moved across the screen with purpose, and she could see the moment he found what he was looking for. The moment his call connected. Yes, hello, Pierce said quietly into the phone. I need to report a credential discrepancy to the state medical board. I have documentation that a staff member may have falsified her background. Yes. I'll wait. Danielle kept walking. Mitchell held the door open, his expression unreadable. Behind them, Pierce's voice dropped lower, more confident, more certain. Her name is Danielle Ross. No, I don't know if that's her real name. That's what I'm hoping you can tell me. The rain had started again outside. Through the corridor windows, Savannah looked grey and wet and endless. The rain had started again outside. Through the corridor windows, Savannah looked grey and wet and endless. Dr. Pierce stood motionless in the pediatric wing for exactly 7 seconds after Danielle left the boy's room. His hands were shaking. Not from shock, from rage. His phone was already in his pocket, his fingers moving before his brain caught up, muscle memory from 20 years of networking, of calling in favors, of being the kind of doctor who didn't lose arguments because he never fought them alone. The hospital board president picked up on the second ring. They'd been classmates at Emory. Shared an apartment in 3rd year. Pierce had written him a check for $50,000 when his daughter needed a private school that didn't ask questions. I need to report a credentialing fraud, Pierce said. His voice was steady now. Measured. A man stating facts. Pediatric nurse, claims a military background. I'm looking at her file and the numbers don't add up. I think we need an external audit before she hurt someone. The board president didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. The machinery of institutional protection is well-oiled and swift when you know the right people to call. By Wednesday morning, the verifications had been dispatched to 3 addresses that didn't exist. A military records office that had closed in 2019. A VA hospital that had burned in a kitchen fire 6 years prior. A training facility in Fort Sam, Houston that had no record of anyone named Danielle Ross in any database from the past 20 years. Within 48 hours, an outside auditor arrived at Cedar Creek. A woman with grey hair and a clipboard and the exhausted expression of someone who'd spent a career looking for paper trails that didn't lead anywhere. She interviewed nurses who suddenly remembered Danielle's odd comments. She reviewed her charting, which was immaculate, which actually made things worse because immaculate charting from someone without credentials looked like calculated deception. She pulled video from the pediatric wing, watched Danielle perform procedures with the confidence of someone who'd done them 1,000 times, and made notes on a yellow legal pad that Pierce would later try to subpoena. By Friday afternoon, the suspension notice was laminated and posted on the unit board. Danielle Ross. Insubordination and overstepping scope of practice. Effective immediately. Pending investigation. Danielle read it once. Didn't pull it down. Didn't call her union representative or a lawyer, because a lawyer would ask questions she couldn't answer. The classified briefing had been clear: if her cover broke, she would be extracted. If she broke her own cover trying to defend herself, she'd burn the entire operation. 7-year-old boy with a dead nanny and trauma locked behind his teeth. Intelligence assessment still ongoing. Her mission was to monitor his psychological recovery, document signs of foreign intelligence interest, and report to the Naval Intelligence Liaison, who called her cell phone every Tuesday at 6 p.m. from a number that changed each time. She couldn't defend herself with the truth. so she defended herself with silence. Security escorted her to her locker at 4:44 p.m. on Friday. A building where she'd worked 12-hour shifts for 8 months, helped doctors save lives, held parents' hands while their children coded, and learned the evacuation routes and guard rotation schedules like a soldier learning terrain. She packed a cardboard box. Her personal items fit inside a box designed for hospital supplies. She was gone in 11 minutes. The drive to the bus stop took 8 minutes. The rain had moved in again, that heavy Savannah rain that felt like someone had turned off a faucet in the sky. Her car sat in the hospital parking lot for one last minute while she sat in the driver's seat and did nothing. Her phone had exactly 43 messages. 42 from other nurses asking if she was okay. 1 from the Naval Intelligence Liaison, 2 words, "Stand down." The bus stop was 3 blocks from the hospital, on a corner where the streetlights buzzed and flickered like insects dying. She parked her car, a 2014 Honda Civic that matched her cover story perfectly, nothing memorable, nothing with any connection to Danielle Ross's other life, and grabbed the cardboard box. The box contained everything she'd brought with her when she arrived 8 months ago. A cracked mug that read "World's Okayest Nurse" in fading letters. A dying succulent in a plastic pot, brown at the edges, the kind of plant that required active neglect to reach this state of deterioration. And a photograph, 5 inches by 7 inches, printed on pharmacy paper. Her former unit. Charlie Platoon, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. 15 faces arranged in 3 rows in front of a desert compound, all of them squinting at the camera like they'd rather be anywhere else. 3 of the faces, Sanchez, Rivera, Montgomery, had been crossed out in thick black marker. Not as memorial. As operational security. Their names couldn't exist in anything connected to her current identity. She stood at the bus stop under an awning that didn't keep out the rain because nothing kept out this kind of rain. The kind that came from the Atlantic and seemed to have opinions about the world. Her jacket was thin. Her scrubs underneath were soaked. The unit patch was still sewn into the lining, a 2nd Marine Division patch in faded red and gold, stitched by hand by a corpsman in Helmand Province during downtime between patrols. She could feel it against her ribs like a secret that was no longer a secret, like a promise she couldn't keep anymore. The rain hammered the bus stop shelter like applause nobody wanted. A car pulled up behind her. She didn't turn around. People didn't approach women standing alone at bus stops in Savannah in the rain at 6:48 p.m. unless they wanted something. She kept her eyes on the street. On the water running in gutters like a river carrying away some version of herself. The window rolled down. "Captain." The voice wasn't military. It was something older than rank. Parental. Scared. Danielle turned and saw Commander Vega in the driver's seat of a black sedan, rain dripping off his hair, his face the color of someone who hadn't slept in 36 hours. His eyes were red. Not from crying. From fury. "Get in the car," he said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. She could have refused. Could have waited for the bus. Could have maintained her cover for another 72 hours until Naval Intelligence called in the extraction protocol and got her out of Savannah with a new name and a new hospital and a new life where she was forgotten again. She could have done all of those things because she was trained to follow protocol and she was better at protocols than she was at being human. Instead, she picked up the cardboard box. She got in the car. The door closed and sealed out the rain and Commander Vega pulled into traffic without explaining, without asking, without doing anything except driving like a man who had already made decisions about what came next. His hands were steady on the wheel. His jaw was locked. He was a 24-year Marine who'd seen 2 wars and given half his mind to them and kept the other half for his son. "He's crashing," Vega said. His voice was level. Professional. The voice of someone reporting a tactical situation. Blood pressure dropping. Respiratory distress. Pierce ordered sedation. More sedation. Said the boy was manipulating staff, that he needed a psych consult instead of a babysitter. Danielle's eyes closed for exactly 1 second. "Where are we going?" she asked. Cedar Creek, he said. You didn't resign. You didn't surrender anything. The car accelerated into the rain like it was moving toward something instead of running from it. The hospital's routine security clearance update flagged something impossible in Danielle's file at 2:41 a.m. on a Thursday, when a junior HR coordinator named Mitchell was working through the quarterly batch alone in a fluorescent-lit basement office that smelled like old coffee and laminate. The classification level that appeared on his screen required Pentagon authorization. Not hospital clearance. Not state medical board approval. Pentagon. Mitchell's hands went cold. He called his supervisor. His supervisor called the hospital president. By 6:15 a.m., Cedar Creek's entire HR department was on a conference call with someone whose title they weren't allowed to write down. By 8:24 a.m., two men in dark suits arrived at the hospital entrance with credentials that made the security guard pale. By 10:51 a.m., the pediatric wing filled with dress uniforms like a flag ceremony had started without music. Captain's dress blues. Commander's insignia. A major. A colonel. And then a two-star general who moved through the halls like the building itself had realigned to accommodate his presence. Dr. Pierce was in his office reviewing labs when he heard the boots on tile, that specific cadence, that military rhythm, and something in his chest went tight. He came to the pediatric corridor and froze. Danielle stood in the hallway outside the boys' room, and for the first time since he'd met her, she was wearing something other than scrubs. Her dress uniform was pressed sharp enough to cut glass, and the insignia at her collar read Captain. The general was looking at her like she was a person he'd known for decades. Like she was someone who mattered in ways that went beyond hospitals. Commander Vega stood in the doorway of his son's room, and the boy, 7 years old, mute for 8 months, silent as a stone, tugged his father's sleeve. He pulled with the urgency of someone holding back a secret that had been eating him alive. His lips moved. The words came out so quietly that everyone in the hallway stopped moving. That's Valkyrie. His voice was rough from disuse, fractured like old concrete, and every officer in that corridor went completely still. That's the Valkyrie from Bagram. That's the one who, the boy's voice broke. That's the one who saved Dad's whole unit. The silence lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then it shattered. Vega's jaw clenched. His eyes locked on Danielle with the recognition of a man who had been carrying a debt for 18 months and didn't know until this moment that he was standing in the same room with the person he owed it to. The general stepped forward. The Pentagon liaison who had arrived with the classified folder opened it without looking at Dr. Pierce, as if Pierce had already ceased to exist in any meaningful way. Danielle's face didn't change. Her composure was absolute, a flat, measured calm that came from having already survived things that would break normal people into pieces. Commander Vega began reading the citation, and his voice cracked like thin ice under pressure. Navy Cross. Danielle Marie Ross, Captain, United States Marine Corps Reserve. For conspicuous gallantry under fire during combat operations at Bagram Airfield, April 15, 2019. Despite incoming enemy fire from multiple positions, Captain Ross performed emergency surgical intervention on a critically wounded Marine, establishing airway control and hemorrhage management using field-expedient equipment under sustained small arms and indirect fire. Her actions directly resulted in the preservation of life for 11 Marines during the siege. Vega's voice broke completely. When it would have been easier to take cover, she stood in the open and saved every single one of them. Dr. Pierce's face had gone the color of old bone. His mouth opened. Words came out before his brain could stop them. This is stolen valor. She's a nurse. This is a fraud. He was sputtering now, his voice climbing. I demand to see credentials. I demand. The two-star general stepped forward. His movements were fluid, precise, the kind of calm that comes from having already survived the worst. He saluted Danielle with the kind of respect reserved for people who had earned it in ways that left scars. His eyes were steady as a surgical laser. Captain Ross. It wasn't a question. It was a recognition. Then he looked at Pierce, and his gaze could have frozen fuel. "Stand down, Doctor." The Pentagon liaison didn't even look up from his folder. When he spoke, his voice was flat as concrete. "Captain Ross has been conducting classified threat assessment operations under Naval Intelligence Authorization. Her placement at Cedar Creek Medical was part of an ongoing investigation into the psychological recovery of a priority asset, the commander's son. Everything she has done here, including her medical interventions, was conducted under direct orders from JSOC Command Authority. You are not cleared to know anything beyond that. Your medical license review hearing is scheduled for Tuesday. You should prepare a defense." Pierce's phone buzzed. Then again. Then again. He pulled it out with fingers that had started to shake. His medical school mentor, the man who had built his entire career, who had made the call that got him hired at Cedar Creek, who had promised to support him through anything, had sent a text. Then a voicemail. Then a formal email that Pierce read while his legs went weak underneath him. The voicemail was 7 seconds long. One sentence. "I've seen the video. I'm withdrawing every letter of recommendation I ever wrote for you. Don't contact me again." By Friday morning, the video had gone live on 17 different platforms. Someone had filmed Pierce's rant in the break room, the one where he'd mocked Danielle's credentials, called her incompetent, said she was riding coattails and playing dress-up, and spliced it alongside the footage of the military arrival. The general salute. The Pentagon liaison statement. Danielle's captain's bars catching the fluorescent light. The boy whispering, "That's Valkyrie." Views hit 6 figures by noon. By Thursday evening, they were at 1.2 million. Comments flooded in from former residents who worked with Pierce, from nurses he'd intimidated, from medical students he'd humiliated. The hospital board convened an emergency meeting not about Danielle, but about Pierce. By Monday, his office was cleaned out. His termination letter cited patient endangerment, abuse of authority, and reputational damage to Cedar Creek Medical. By Tuesday, his license review hearing was scheduled. By Wednesday, he was interviewing for a CPR instructor position at a community college in Jacksonville for $18 an hour. He sat in a waiting room with recent graduates who looked at him like he was a cautionary tale. The interview was young enough to be someone he'd taught in med school. "We need someone who can connect with community members, show real empathy. Do you think you can do that?" Pierce opened his mouth. Closed it. Had no answer. The job posting was still online when he left. The interview's handshake was perfunctory. 6 months later, Cedar Creek's renovated pediatric wing opened as a trauma-informed care unit, funded through a Veterans Affairs grant that Danielle had written and submitted under her actual name and actual authority. The new wing had soft lighting instead of harsh fluorescence. It had space for military families to sleep beside their children. It had consultation protocols that recognized trauma symptoms instead of medicalizing normal responses to abnormal events. Danielle stood in scrubs, captain's rank insignia now worn openly on her collar, kneeling beside a bed where Commander Vega's son sat coloring, his voice steady and clear as he told her about his first day back at school. "I told them about you," he said, the pencil moving with focus across the paper. "I told them about Valkyrie." She handed him the faded unit patch, the one from her jacket lining, the one she'd carried through Bagram and through months of pretending to be something smaller than what she was. "This belongs to you now." He clutched it like a talisman. Like it was the thing that had kept his father alive. Like it was the thing that had kept him alive. Other children in the unit came from military families, children carrying their own silences, their own traumas, the weight of parents who came home different or didn't come home at all. This was the mission she could finally complete in the open. This was the work that mattered. Commander Vega stopped by during afternoon visiting hours, shook her hand with the grip of a man paying a debt he could never fully repay. "You saved him twice," he said. "I just did my job," Danielle replied. "Both times." Her phone buzzed, another consultation request from Walter Reed, another child whose parent had seen the video and requested her specifically. She accepted it without hesitation. The boy ran to the window, pointing at children playing in the new courtyard below, his voice bright with something that looked like hope. On the wall behind her, a framed photograph, her old unit from before Bagram, all 23 faces visible, taken before everything changed. Below it, a single plaque with words she had specifically requested: "Power is not a title. Power is the ability to help." The tremor that had lived in her left hand for 18 months was completely gone. If you've made it this far, you know what it means to be underestimated. You know what it feels like to have your skills, your strength, your value questioned by someone with a title but no depth. Subscribe for more stories about the quiet people who change everything. Like this video if you believe the best warriors are sometimes the ones nobody sees coming. And comment, have you ever been proven right after someone completely doubted you?